Welcome to the Wellness Esquire Podcast. I'm Ariella, and I'm so glad you're here for this conversation with Colin Levy. Colin and I connected on LinkedIn during COVID because we were both showing up super authentically. I was talking about my physical health story, and he was talking about his mental health. We talk about Colin's experience with anxiety and depression, and how learning to ask for help and speak more openly has changed the way he shows up in his life and his work. We talk about perfectionism, self-criticism, and the pressure to hold it all together. We talk about grief, how it shows up unexpectedly, and how we continue moving through our professional lives while carrying very real personal loss. And we may, by the way, sometimes have an off day, believe it or not, and that's okay. We also talk about the role of people and relationships in the legal profession, as well as the role AI plays and why it's so important to approach it as a tool to enhance our work, not as a replacement for human judgment. This was a really great conversation, and I'm incredibly grateful to Colin for having it with me. Thank you for listening. Remember to rate and subscribe, and enjoy. Fantastic. Hello. Oops, I had no sound on. Can you hear me?
Hi there. I'm so sorry. A meeting ended literally at 1, so I was running. Well,
You're so sorry because you're like maybe even 60 seconds late.
I hate being late. It drives me nuts, and I think it's because I grew up with parents who were always late to everything, and it drove me up a wall.
So first of all, I don't care. You're fine. So if you're feeling any sort of guilt that you need, to release, please do. I'm the same way about myself. I don't like being late. But when other people are, unless you like do it routinely, I'm like, what are you doing? But we all have other stuff going on. And, I put this in the same category. I think I would have told you, but I might have forgotten. I've started to proactively tell guests, you are welcome to reschedule as many times as you need to, including super last minute. And I started doing that because so many people had to reschedule, and sometimes really last minute, because life happens. And they would feel so guilty. And here I am, with a podcast where we're talking about well-being and life and the hard things, and including how hard we are on ourselves. And it feels a little ridiculous to be like, no, you can't have life happening. You can't have personal stuff. You can't have health stuff. You can't have work stuff. So that is all to say, I'm going to call you on time, and it's all good.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. Funny quick story. I actually had I had a call with someone, and I've never seen this before ever in any booking page, who had a fee that you had to agree to pay if you canceled the meeting, I think within like 24, it might have been 48, something like that hour. I'm like, who does that?
What kind of a meeting was this for? Or who?
It was for a potential service. Like it was kind of kind of a feeling out call to see if this service would be useful. I ended up not going with it, but just for that initial call, there was that fee. I'm like, first of all, I don't think, as a lawyer, I don't think that's really binding per se. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but I wouldn't want to test it. But secondly, who does that?
I'm sure there are weirder things out there, but
I'm sure there are that I really don't want to know about.
Right? There's all sorts of ways to be a person. And, I can understand, I once, I had to reschedule something, I think 3 times for very legitimate reasons. But I wanted to meet with a potential vendor, and that I didn't know, we'd never spoken. And that vendor, was trying to build it, he's got a business and he's got things to do it. And so on his end, he got a little bit, maybe a little bit more than a little bit, bothered by my, I think 3 times of rescheduling. And one of the times was actually he had missed sort of an instruction that I had given about when I needed him to do the rescheduling, whatever. And he's now one of my vendors because we had an interaction. I explained, he apologized. We had a whole just communication about sort of values and priorities and where things went wrong. And then I thought, well, I love this guy. And so I say that to say, I understand when people, well, I understand sometimes when people get peeved for when someone does reschedule because it's your time. I personally feel like, well, it's not like I have a shortage of things to do.
Right,
If things don't work
exactly.
out,
Yeah.
bring
I
over
mean,
to my list.
I look, I'll give people a grace period. I'll give people benefit of the doubt in terms of showing up for things. I only, the only time I'll get a little miffed is if they don't show up and then I don't hear from them.
Right.
That's when I'm like, okay, I don't care what it is. You could have told me the sky was falling. Obviously, that's not true, but that's fine. But I would have taken that over silence, you know?
I agree. And to me, so much of it is simply about communication. If you
Right.
don't communicate, you're out. If you
Yep.
do, even if it's like a little bit of an awkward situation, okay, you communicate about it. We're all awkward sometimes. It's fine. And I given that some of what we're going to talk about today are, things like anxiety, there's so many of us just within the industry who struggle with different forms of, self-criticism and anxiety and, perfectionism and maladaptive perfectionism and feeling like we're not good enough and like all of these kinds of things. And then we go and get mad at people and sometimes mean toward people who, when a life thing happens and they either fall short or maybe they just fall short in some way, either because they did show up and they really couldn't do it well and they needed to have said, I really can't do this right now, or they didn't show up and then, there's all sorts of versions of this. But we don't help the those negative, self feelings when we create an environment where people are afraid to say, hey, this isn't good for me right now, I need to change it, so sorry for the last minute change, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. And exactly. And this actually podcast comes up on a good time because I actually was literally texting a friend the other today that yesterday I was feeling just kind of a little down and depressed, and it wasn't really for any particular reason. I mean, there are reasons I could be feeling that way, but that wasn't it because I know myself. And that's just part of, I think, just having like anxiety and these issues is just that happen to just kind of pop up at times.
Yeah, and it's for all of us, whether these things pop up, we're human. I know, like, a lot of your posts are just like, hey, actually, what I love about your posts, even, from when we first connected, which I think was in the COVID days when we were, I think, both starting to just talk about like, hey, we're humans, this,
I think that's true.
um, but I love that you're also talking about just our humanness, even when you're focused on AI and technology, which we tend to forget that we are human. So I want to get into all of these things, but before we get into the juicier personal stuff, or maybe this will have some juicy personal stuff too. Tell me, what led you to go to law school in the first place?
Yeah. So I went to law school because there were a couple things that really were of interest to me. Um, One was the sort of interdisciplinary nature of law and the fact that it touches so many different areas of life and also incorporates so many different subjects in some ways, um, which drew me to actually transactional law because that sort of even more so touches upon a lot of different areas. I like reading and writing, so that is also a reason. And I also like to challenge myself, and um, practicing law is definitely I think a challenging profession. But I think what I didn't necessarily um, understand at the time, and now understand a lot more, is that the challenge is not necessarily the law or applying it. It's actually just understanding people and managing people's behavior and understanding people's behavior. Because as a lawyer, you're often people's therapist, counselor, all sorts of things that they don't really kind of talk about or bring up a whole lot in law school, which arguably they should.
That is such a good point. When did you start to hone in on that and understand that as being such a huge aspect of what the job is?
I think my first job out of law school, my first full time role, I immediately understood that to be the case because I was dealing with people of all sorts of different personalities and realized that the challenge I was facing wasn't a lack of knowledge or anything uh, along those lines. It was more a matter of just managing people's personalities and not letting personalities get in the way of the work that needs to get done.
Man, I wish that I had had the framing that you just said years ago. That hits home so well, and you touch on things that I figured out over the years in little snippets, but never framed it exactly that way. And I'm gonna have to sit with that a lot later. That's fantastic. So tell me in a nutshell about your some of the jobs, starting with shortly after law school up until the work that you do now. And as part of that, like, how did you become so focused on legal tech? Was that always of an interest to you, or did that pop up along the way? Maybe I'm
So
going on at the beginning, but
yeah, well, let me answer sort of the first part of your question first, which is I have to go back actually to prior to law school. So I worked for a firm in New York as a paralegal doing supporting e-discovery and creating e-discovery databases, which gave me my first sort of taste of legal technology, and that was what really kind of piqued my interest in the space. Um, Even though I found the technology not challenging, but the work itself was challenging to some degree. And then after that, I went to law school. There was very little talk about technology, and I thought to myself, well, okay, there's this clear gap between the tech world and the legal world when there shouldn't be, because the tech world needs the legal world, and they're intersecting in closer and closer ways, and that has proven to be especially true. Um, Over the next number of years that followed, and certainly today. And so I realized that if I wanted to learn about that space, I needed to reach out to those who were actually talking about it, doing something about it, i.e., creating products or teaching about it. And so that's what I did. And those conversations then helped kind of set me on this path. At the same time, um, I struggled to find a full-time job immediately upon graduating from law school, because at the time it was sort of the Great Recession, the tail end of it. So I had to just find temporary jobs, which I did, but gave me some exposure, some more technology, but also gave me exposure to the types of work that used the skills I knew I needed to refine to be an in-house lawyer. And then when I became an in-house lawyer, one of my tasks during that time was actually to help co-create a rudimentary kind of document review / management system pertaining to non-disclosure agreements. And that project further reinforced my interest in technology and its impact upon law, and also my desire to work more in the tech industry, which I have since done with a variety of in-house roles. And so those two things combined eventually led me to being connected with folks in the legal tech space, who then helped me get the job that I have now with Malbec. So that's sort of a shortened version of that career journey, but it really was one that was unexpected and wasn't necessarily fully intentional. But looking back, all the things that I've done and the jobs I've had all kind of were in some ways connected to one another and being stepping stones towards what I do now.
what do you think a lot of lawyers don't understand about legal tech, just in general, before we even get to AI?
Yeah, I think a lot of lawyers probably don't understand the fact that we're talking about technology that is not, we're not talking about technology that is legal literally under the law, meaning that, oh, this is approved by a lawyer and therefore you can do it or not. Obviously, tools that exist would have to be that way for them to be sold and used. But really, what we're talking about are technologies and tools that are both meant to augment how you practice, but also meant to augment sort of what it is you do on a daily basis as a lawyer. And so I think people really need to understand the fact that legal tech is not just about the technology itself, but also about the processes involved that embody those tools and the people that use those tools and the broader impacts upon both. Um, and that's how I kind of view legal tech in general. And I think that's what a lot of people tend to miss. They tend to be focused, especially these days, on the tools and not upon the other elements that help make those tools as powerful as they are.
Okay, now same question with AI. What do you think a lot of lawyers don't understand about AI, and in particular in a way that makes them afraid of it?
I think that people don't tend to, or people tend to get shiny key syndrome, especially with AI, and think that, oh, well, someone's using this tool, so therefore I should use that tool or this tool, without really thinking about about why do you want to use that tool? Why are you even looking at AI in the first place? What is your intended goal? What is the problem you're trying to solve? Those things tend to get a little bit shoved to the wayside um, by virtue of people just being drawn to the shiny beauty, if you will, of AI tools. And that had been the case before with legal tech, but is especially now the case with AI. I think in part because we're so bombarded with AI marketing and the fact that AI seems to be everywhere all at the same time, and everything seems to have an AI component to it. And so that noise and that hype tends to lead people astray or get them distracted.
How do you think lawyers can use legal tech and AI responsibly? I know you just put out a 72-page guide, and it's sort of like for the novice or for someone who's been in it and just like needs some more attention. Um, how do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think that using AI effectively and ethically, I think starts with having a clear idea of what's driving you to use it. What are you who are you trying to support, who are you trying to help, and how. And it also comes from a point of understanding, kind of to some degree, how AI works, and that it's at its core essentially a powerful pattern recognition tool. So it's not really thinking so much as matching up patterns, and that has some limitations to it. So you need to understand those. And I think in addition, you need to understand that these tools are not, like any tool, are most powerful and useful when the people that are using them have an understanding of why they're using the tool. In other words, they know how to use the tool. And so that, I think, is an important component as well. And all really this comes down to is, and this drives largely why I put out some of the content I do, like the guide, is to help people become more sort of cognizant of those limitations and the benefits of using these tools, and understanding that they're not neutral, but they're also not sort of a foe or a hero. They're kind of somewhere in the middle and can be used for a variety of different purposes, and it's up to you to figure out how it fits into what you're trying to accomplish.
I also think of it as just like another version of it's a tool in a way that's sort of similar to an associate or a colleague is a tool. When you're working with another human, you don't just say, hey, go do this. Okay, great. I'm not going to use my own brain. I'm going to just like submit it and hope you did a good job and whatever. Like we still expect to use our own brains. Same thing with the tools that come in the tech form. You use it
Yeah.
for what it is. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to jump in because you have me all excited. Because I could talk about this stuff all day long. But yes, exactly. They are tools. They're here to augment and supplement what you do, rather than completely kind of take over what you're doing. And that has, been a debate and a cause of some controversy, because I think as humans we tend to take a us versus them type of approach to a lot of things, especially things that seem to be competing with us when that's really, I think, a short-sighted and or misguided way to look at AI.
You know, as you said that, it made me think that maybe a lot of us in law, and I'm sure other industries, kind of have a scarcity mindset going on about this of, well, what's it? Because I hear and see, in the industry, people, well, it's going to take my job. What if it takes my job? And then I've seen other people say, well, if it's going to take my job, I'll do something else. Like it'll be fine. And if I'm doing a job that it really can take over, like what does that mean about what I'm delivering at this point anyways? And then just, let's get creative, look for other things. It's not like we haven't dealt before with industries changing. We can do it.
Yeah, no, we can do it for sure. And in some ways, this is kind of harking back to how it was when the internet first arrived, and it was clunky, but we also were kind of like, well, what do we do with this thing? And it definitely dramatically changed things, but it didn't completely have the complete transformational impact I think some had feared. And AI in some ways is like that, although AI arguably I would say is moving faster than the internet did. But the truth of it remains the same, which is that it is here and it is changing in sometimes dramatic ways in which we do our work and what we do versus what AI does. But it is not a matter of kind of completely replacing what it is that we do. And the reason why I've grown more confident in that view is because of the fact that humans have this inherent need to be with other humans and be connected to other humans. And AI cannot yet replicate that sort of almost indescribable kind of embedded feeling or sensation. Will we reach a point where it can? I think I would be foolish to say that's never going to happen. But when, I don't know. But we're certainly, I think, a ways away from that. So I do think there is sort of a need to kind of remind ourselves of the fact that we need to be with others. We need relationships with others, and that is unlikely to change anytime soon. And certainly when, COVID was at its height and there were lockdowns and things, we were, I think, really had a stark reminder of that fact.
How do you think about AI or legal tech in general and efficiency I guess in general, but it's more specifically in the context of lawyer burnout?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, yes, it can make lawyers more efficient. In terms of helping lawyers not burn out, um, burnout's an interesting thing. I think it's a function not just of the amount of work you're doing, but how long you've been doing it for. And some people have a higher tolerance and a lower tolerance. Me, for example, I can't imagine myself not working, but other people are like, I'd be happy not to work. Um, so I think that it's a complex question because I don't see the efficiency gains from AI necessarily having a one-to-one impact upon people becoming less burned out or people working longer or what have you. I think it's going to be kind of more of an individual case by case basis. But if I had to say definitively or to some degree, one way or the other, I would imagine that it likely would lessen burnout to some degree, but I would argue perhaps not to the same degree that some would argue in terms of it being this, really widespread, dramatic tempering of burnout.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. I think I don't see it as like, oh, it's not like it's going to solve the burnout issue. I sometimes wonder about, when we see, stories of lawyers and they've filed cases and with, hallucinated case law and things like that. And I just wonder, as we all do, like, how did that happen? And of course, sometimes, they explain like they didn't understand it wasn't like Lexis or something like that. They just didn't understand what they were using. But I also end up wondering, like, a lot of the time it's sometimes it's partners. It's lawyers who've been doing this job for a long time. They know what they're doing, and it's to me, I don't know them, but I, from the outside, assume it's not about laziness. And I just end up wondering, well, how much of it was you were looking for a shortcut because you were out of time, you were out of energy, something like that, and you just thought, oh, let me try this tool. Oh, this seems really cool. And you didn't understand, its limitations. But I often just wonder or assume that you're going in that direction you because you're looking for that kind of, I'll call it bandwidth help. And so does it end up being like one of the tools in the toolbox to just help people not fall off a cliff sometimes?
Yeah. So I think that, well, number one, AI tools being hallucinating is not, I would argue, not a flaw. I think it's just an inherent part of these tools and just something you have to get used to because they're probabilistic. And so um, they're likely going to come up with an answer that seems probable
Mm-hmm.
and plausible, but may not be completely accurate. Um, because of the limited data set, but also because of the fact that it's looking for patterns in any mathematician who's a specialist in probability would tell you that trying to calculate the probability of getting a certain answer from one of these tools is pretty close to impossible given the number of different probabilities that there are. Secondly, I think that, so that's the technical piece of it. The less technical piece of it is that folks, frankly, I think sometimes are a little lazy, but also think that they don't need to double check their work, which they definitely need to do because these tools are imperfect. They're created by humans. Humans are imperfect. So it follows that these would be imperfect. And no tool is going to do things exactly right. I mean, even take a hammer, for example. Yes, a hammer. If you hit it just right on a nail, it's going to move the nail in. Great. But is it always going to do that? No. Is that partly your fault? Yes. Is it partly the hammer's fault? Yes. So, there's that piece of it. And which brings me to this topic. I don't want to go too much into it, given I'm sure there are other questions to discuss, but, there have been some studies that have come out that have shown a little bit of the danger of what's called cognitive offloading, meaning you're giving up too much of your cognitive ability to AI, which can have a detrimental impact upon yourself and your ability to think through things. And we don't want that. We need to prevent that from happening. So I think that AI, again, needs to be viewed as a tool in your toolbox, but not as the only tool and not as your sole resource for doing literally everything.
Absolutely. So you touched on human imperfection. So I want to ask you, what has been your relationship over the years with perfectionism?
Um, I would say that for a large part of my life, perfectionism has been, unfortunately, a very big influence on my life. That probably helps explain why I'm a lawyer in part because a lot of lawyers also are perfectionists. Um, and for me, it goes back to just the need to always be doing things the best and be the best. Because I am inherently a fairly competitive person, even though professionally I'm not. But you put me in any other environment, I'm pretty competitive. So there is that piece of it, and also I'm just always driven to improve, to be better, to um, always be doing things exactly right. So I hold myself up to a fairly high, often I would say, at least historically, unrealistic standard. So perfectionism definitely has driven me in part, sometimes to my detriment. So it's been a battle to kind of accept the fact that you can't be perfect. That perfectionism is just not achievable.
You talk on LinkedIn and elsewhere about your mental health, and we mentioned briefly before. I think that's how we ended up connecting during COVID. Both of us were in our own ways just starting to simply show up more authentically and talking about the things that we often have been either explicitly told or implicitly guided that, certainly in our industry, we're not supposed to talk about out loud. And then we both went, no, I think I'm going to try this out. And here we are, and we talk about it. So why did you start talking about your mental health?
I started talking about primarily to help me get some of these thoughts out of my head, but also to help show others that it's okay to talk about it because mental health is just as important to our overall health as any other piece. And so there's long been sort of not sure necessarily stigma is the right word anymore, but there was this sort of feeling of like, oh, maybe you don't want to talk about that because you're going to come off a certain way or what have you, which is the whole reason to talk about it, to combat that sense and that feeling, and also to come off more authentically and show that, we all struggle, and that's just an inherent part of being human, and it's okay. It's okay to struggle. It's okay to, not be perfect. It's okay to have hard days for whatever reason, and okay to have feelings. Sometimes feelings you can't necessarily rationalize or what have you. So that's why I talk about it. And I think, I have gotten messages from folks who have expressed privately, as well as those who've commented on my post publicly, that they appreciate it. And to me, that drives me to want to continue to do it, to help just support others and just show that this is okay, and it's okay to not be okay.
It is okay to not be okay. When did you first either start experiencing anxiety or depression, or if you aren't sure, when did you become aware that you were struggling?
Oh, well, I mean, hindsight is 2020, of course, but I would say that I've always had anxiety and depression, just didn't really know how to verbalize it or kind of explain it. And it luckily came out, I think, abundantly clear when partly when I was in law school, and then when I first started working as a lawyer, just because of the stress and all of that, and me being an anxious person, it just kind of all sort of just bubbled up and needed to come out, because for a long time I was very good at just keeping things inside, which was not a great approach. I definitely would not encourage that to anyone. So once it became abundantly clear to me what was going on, I tried to be proactive about working through it and addressing it. And it's ongoing, and it hasn't been easy at all, but I am a completely different person now than I was, I'd say 20 years ago or more, when these issues were definitely more present and more controlling, I think, of me and my behavior.
What did it look like, if you don't mind sharing, for it to be abundantly clear?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to go into sort of too much of
Share
it,
only
but
what you want. We can move on if you don't want to get into
no,
it.
no, no. I'm happy to chat to some degree. I mean, look, it came out in the form of having some serious feelings that were detrimental to my well-being, and me needing to take some time off from working, and um, seeking therapy. And so I did that, but it was really hard for me to, I think, acknowledge the fact that I needed help and then actually seek it out, because I also was someone who's long been um, very much my own person, and wanted to forge my own path, and thought that I didn't need help, or that help was not necessarily a good thing. And now I take the opposite view, where I think help is a sign of strength and a sign of you being cognizant of yourself. But yeah, it's been a journey, but I'm glad that I've had it, because it's definitely made me both in part the person I am today, but also way more cognizant of my own feelings. Now, am I always great about talking about them? No, but am I better at it than I had been in the past? Yes.
I think that's all we can hope and ask for, right? Is to just keep getting better at it. There was a point when I um, I started working on my own perfectionism. Sometime during COVID, my husband had pointed out that I was like so empathetic, so kind to everyone else but myself, and so that led me on a very focused year of say like the self compassion practice, and that was like my foray into working on my perfectionism. And I remember at some point early-ish on in that, you know, and working on that, when I thought to myself, where something, I'd been really trying to be kinder to myself, and I was being so much nicer to myself when I wasn't perfect. And then I had some other context come up where I hadn't been practicing the self-compassion. And I just remember thinking, oh my God, there's another area I have to practice self-compassion in. I'm not perfect at this yet. oh my God, this is going to go on forever. And then was able to shift that from, oh, great. Okay. So I can keep getting better at this and there will always be work to do. How lovely. Instead of, I'm never going to be done. It's tough. It's, there's always more self-work to do. But I think for me, at least, I've been able to develop a positive relationship with that work. How is that for you?
Yeah. For me, I definitely have now a much healthier relationship with work. Mainly because I'm passionate about what I'm doing and enjoy it, so it doesn't feel like work as much. But also just a recognition of the fact that um, boundaries are important, and I'm better at establishing boundaries between work and not work, and being a little more in control, and not being shy about being a little more in control how I spend my time. And so all those things kind of play into um, sort of the relationship I have with work, and um, how I view things, and how I just kind of manage day to day.
How do you manage, on an average day, um, where maybe the anxiety and depression isn't too extreme? What are the things that you'll do for yourself to just kind of keep you even keeled in the way you want to be able to navigate your day?
Yeah, so writing for me is definitely one of those ways of kind of getting thoughts out of my head and kind of relaxing a little bit. Um, I also just take time to, um, well, sometimes I'm demanded to do this by the cats, but I also take time to attend to the cats that we have and make sure they're happy-ish. Um, and I also just, if I need to step away from the computer to just walk or what have you, I do that. Um, because I do spend a lot of time in front of a computer screen, but I also try to make sure that I, am being a little bit better at it. That's a work in progress, but that's another thing I do. And if I can, I go for, a walk outside, maybe a little bit, or go for a drive or what have you, just to kind of mix up my day and get myself out of the house a little bit. So it really depends on each day, but certainly those days when the feelings are a little bit stronger, I try to, if nothing else, at least acknowledge the fact that I'm feeling that way, and so kind of go through my day with that understanding that, okay, you're feeling a little bit stronger about these things, so just be a little more cautious about how you approach things so as not to exacerbate those feelings.
When you started posting online about your mental health, were you concerned about, what your colleagues were going to think, or what, how others would perceive what you were sharing?
I was to some degree, but at the same time, I said, you know what? If they're gonna express anything besides kind of just like want to make sure you're okay, if they express something else like, I don't think you're, right for this, whatever have you, that would tell me all I would need to know about, not being at the right place or what have you. So, um, I was concerned to some degree, but I also thought to myself, you know what, I'm doing this for me, not for them. So it's just there, and that is something I also have grown to be better about doing, is doing things more for me, so to speak, not in a selfish way, but more in a self care way.
How have you learned to do that? Like, have you had an intentional practice, or is it, what does that look like?
Frankly, it's been a matter of therapy, helping me to have tools to manage that, as well as just support of friends and family, and just kind of knowing that they're there for me, and knowing that I need to do things as much for me as much for others. So there's that, sort of having a little more balance in my life.
Have you always, you mentioned a couple of times that you're the importance of asking for help and support, and it's one thing to understand that that's a good idea. It's another thing to figure out how to pick up a phone and call someone and actually say, I'm not okay. How, have you always been like, how did you become someone who could say, okay, I'm so okay, not okay right now that I actually need to call someone and say, your version of those words?
I think kind of being encouraged and supported about seeking help and being kind of frankly told like it's okay to get help, and it probably would be good for you, and me accepting that from the friends or family that have been encouraging of that. So I think that's kind of where it came from, and then after that it's just a matter of repetition of reminding myself that it is that way, and now it's kind of just embedded as a part of how I think about things.
So you posted a few weeks ago that you had a loss in your family, and you tell me if you want to talk about it or not.
No,
Um,
happy to talk about it, to the extent to which I feel okay talking about it.
First of all, I'm just so sorry. Um, and second, to the extent that you want to share who you lost and any combination of the impact it's had on you, and just how you're coping, because so many of us, we we're super ambitious, we show up to do our jobs, people have high expectations of us. I mean, we've got these real lives going on in the background, and some of it's filled with a lot of pain. For me, just to have you not being the only vulnerable one, we're recording in April. April is a very hard month for me. My dad died when I was 17. That's next week. He went into a coma, which, the 28th is when he died. 14th is when he went into a coma. His birthday was the 8th. We've got things around Pesach. It's a lot of pain. And so, sometimes I'll tell people that. Sometimes I'll be mindful about carving out time to be quieter, and I'll allow myself to have less on my calendar, or make more exceptions or boundaries or whatever. So, but most people don't know that that's going on in my life. I certainly do. A couple people do. um, and so I share that just to kind of give you someone else to saying there's a lot of pain going on behind the scenes, and then we show up and we try to kick ass, and then we also then want to go cry afterwards sometimes.
Yeah. Well, first of all, very sorry to hear that, and hope that you manage it okay. As for my loss, well, thank you for your kind words. It was my stepfather-in-law, and he died suddenly doing what he loved, which was skiing. So literally just out skiing and then just collapsed, and that was kind of it. And so on the bright side, he died what he was doing what he loved. On the flip, it was relatively. I mean, it was just completely shocking and unexpected. So it's been hard, but I think that if anything, it's reinforced something I talked about earlier, which is kind of making the most of the time that I have every day, and being thankful for what I have and what I'm doing, and some of the usual things that come from sort of a grief process, but also recognizing that every person's grief process is different, and so initially after it happened, I was not in a great place. I am better now, but I also know that I'm likely to have feelings again, seemingly at random over the next, I don't know, indefinite period of time. And that's just part of it, and need to accept it. And all I can do now is just be there for others, which is really what my primary goal is with respect to this. And yeah, but I think it's just shown me again just the fact that unfortunately loss is just an inherent part of life itself, really.
And the unscheduled grieving part that you mentioned, just it feels so inconvenient.
It does feel inconvenient, but you know what? You're not in control. It's not. It's. you have to accept that it's just not something you can control. So,
How
um,
do you manage that part, as, someone who I assume likes a decent amount of control, as many of us lawyers do. Correct me if I'm wrong about that.
oh no, I'm a control freak, and not about admitting it. But yeah, I think it's just a matter of kind of you know accepting the fact that just you can't control everything, and that is one of those things you just can't control.
Has like this loss or your experience with anxiety or depression, it impacted the way that you think about your work, your career, and the priorities you put on it, and sort of, the way you think about what's important and where you put your energy and where you'll make exceptions, and um, I guess ultimately just about the way you think about building your career inside of your life.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, I think, given me a renewed sense of focusing on what makes me happy and what I want to be doing and how I want to be most productive and all of that. So that's certainly, I think, been a part of it. And again, I think for better or for worse, it's just another stark reminder of you just can't control everything.
What does make you happy?
Uh, a lot of things. I mean, certainly, doing what I do in legal tech, writing about it, helping others learn makes me happy. Um, my husband makes me happy. Being outdoors in the mountains makes me happy. The cats make me happy for the most part, um, except when they don't, but it's fine. Cats have taught me a lot about patience too.
Mm.
Um, Playing video games makes me happy. Those are kind of the things that I do just kind of to unwind. Um, I'd say a variety of things make me happy, and all of them combined just kind of make me who I am.
If you had a magic wand and you could change anything about the legal industry, whether it's about legal tech or the way we talk about and kind of, navigate or care for each other around mental health or anything else, what would it be?
It would probably be to have lawyers be ever mindful of the fact that we're all human, and as humans, we're emotional creatures, and for better for worse, that sometimes influences how we make decisions. So we have to kind of account for that and not pretend as if it's not a thing.
How do you think you really learned about that? Because it's, to me, again, back to what you were talking about at the beginning of the conversation, it's amazing that you had that awareness and insight the way you did, and the way you frame it now from early on. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I would say it's come over time. It certainly didn't just kind of show up one day and all of a sudden I was like, oh, I get it. It was more a matter of working and observing and dealing with people and just understanding that piece of it and how big a role that plays in being a lawyer and managing people and managing projects, and how that's often the much more difficult piece of it than the legal work itself is. And so that's kind of where it comes from. But again, the benefit of hindsight is also kind of looking back and observing and learning from sort of the journey that's been.
How do you, I mean, with your team and in your own work environment, how do you kind of enhance the the environment, and for yourself, for people around you, so that there can be that awareness around, yeah, like the technical stuff we're doing is challenging, but like the people part, that's key, and we've got to learn how to communicate with each other. That's more of the job than we realize, and that's part of success here.
Yeah, for me, it comes from just building relationships with people, building strong rapport with people, building, establishing trust, and having those relationships where everyone is trusting one another and able to kind of, just know that working with others, things will get done. And that's really where I think it comes down to. And I argue that's especially important in my work environment where we're all remote working from wherever we are. And so really what makes a difference are those relationships and building them and maintaining them. And I would argue, in general, relationship building is probably a huge marker of success, is your ability to do that.
Do you have one top tip for remote culture relationship building?
Checking in with people, just making time out of your day, just say hello, check in with people, say, see how things are going, work wise or otherwise. That's, I would say, a really important thing to do.
What a wild idea.
Right.
Anything else you want to share? Something we've touched on or something we haven't yet touched on?
Um, Look, I would just say that at the end of the day, your life is your life, so live it the way you wanna live it.
I like that. That's a good place to stop. Thank you so much. I'm so thrilled we ended up finding a time to do this.
Absolutely, yeah. My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to sharing, and I really enjoyed this conversation. So thanks again.
Excellent. Thanks for listening. I hope you got a ton of value from this conversation and that you will check out the links in the description to learn more about the guest and the Wellness Esquire. And I hope you take even just 1 minute to do something for yourself today. Maybe right now, drink more water, say no, call a friend, do something that makes you happy, have a 30-second dance party, find something to make you laugh. Also, be sure to subscribe and send the podcast to a colleague. And if we're not yet connected on LinkedIn, please fix that. I'd love to know you. See you next time.